This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 106. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back. Holy smokes, you guys. You blow me away. I feel even just a bit emotional just talking to you guys and saying a very, very deep thank you to the incredible feedback and response to last week's episode where I shared my own experience with failure and medical issues and mental health. And I was really scared, but was not expecting the amazing response. I really was not. I don't know what I was expecting, but holy smokes, you guys, you blew me away with your kindness and your prayers and your thoughts and your thank yous. And it seems like I hit a little bit of a chord for you guys, which makes me so grateful and happy that you feel even more connected here in this safe space. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to also really reiterate that it's not over and it's never really over, and our recovery and our healing is a patient practice. And I never want you guys to, there's so many people out there on social media and out there saying like, here are 10 things that will make your anxiety go away really fast. And the one thing you need to do to make depression go away really fast. And every time I hear that, I cringe because it keeps feeding this idea that it's supposed to go away really fast. And it gives us these unrealistic expectations on ourselves. And so I just want to give you guys permission and really to know the facts and the realistic piece here, which is it takes time. Healing takes time. Really good healing takes time. And if it's taking time for you, you're definitely not alone. Okay. So thank you. I am so grateful. I will reflect more as I process and learn more about myself, and maybe that will be helpful for you. Maybe it won't. We'll just be uncertain about that. Okay. Before we get into this week's episode, I have a really special I Did a Hard Thing segment to share with you. So this is an anonymous I Did a Hard Thing, and it was actually sent to me via DM on Instagram. And I just love this, and I asked her if she wouldn't mind sharing, she or he, because it's anonymous. And here it is. I did a really hard thing yesterday. I have had a fear of heights. My family took me to a tree canopy ropes course. We were connected to a harness and a safety line, but it was about 30 to 40 feet off the ground. There was a section where we had to hold a trapeze bar and swing across the next platform. I was so scared that I was crying, and I really wanted to turn around and get off the course. But I had already gotten pretty far in the course, and I decided today is a great day to do hard things, and this is really, really hard. So I took a minute to do some 5-9 breathing, and I closed my eyes and jumped off the platform, and I made it across. I'm still afraid of heights, but I'm slowly working through this fear and challenging myself. You guys, oh my gosh, this story had my heart racing too, because as I was reading, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even think I could jump off a platform like that. That just goes against everything my brain would want to do. But this person did it, and they really focused on empowering themselves And they recognized that their limitation was literally a thought, as it is for most of us. Most of the time, our limitations are thoughts. And I just loved this hard thing. I loved this piece so much. And I'm so grateful they allowed me to share it with you, because I think it really just shows how brave we really are if we don't buy into the narrative anymore. So great, great work. Love, love, love that I did a hard thing. And I'm so grateful. Anytime you guys have a hard thing you want to share with me, please do. Email them, DM them, share them, tag me in Instagram or Facebook. Go on the Facebook group, CBT School Campus. You can share it with people there as well. I love hearing that stuff. Okay, that being said, this is a very, very cool episode, I must say. This one will take you right back to the basics of what this is all about. Everything this podcast is about, this podcast episode will walk you through it. Now, today on the episode, we have with us Dr. Sarah Sarkis. Now, Dr. Sarah Sarkis is a psychologist, a writer, a performance consultant with a private practice in Honolulu, Hawaii. I have major private practice envy. However, it won't take you long to discover that she's a Boston girl at heart. Her integrated approach is big on science, low on bullshit, empowering us to achieve long-term change and growth through an eclectic blend of psychology, neurobiology, and functional medicine. I loved it. She went through all this stuff in the episode. You're just going to love this so much. She also has a blog, The Padded Room. It's a virtual safe place to help you manage the jarring realities of life. And there you'll find a soft landing for life's hardest truths. And you can find her at drsarahsarkis.com. And if you go to the show notes, I will link her Facebook and her Instagram and her website right there. Well, let me give you a little intro here. Sarah and I, oh man, she's so cool. And I love this episode, number one, because she's very direct and her view on anxiety is so good. So good, so direct, so compassionate. I just loved the way that she frames anxiety. And so my main goal here, as I said to her at the beginning of the interview, is I just love hearing other people's approach to anxiety and fear. I just love hearing how they approach it and what they would do and how they conceptualize the treatment. So she takes us through her way of approaching and treating fear. She takes us through how society really gets us stuck. And in fact, you will catch that she even catches me out once on how society has gotten me stuck here too, which I thought was so cool and just so true of all of our human instincts. She talked to us about optimum performance and also talked to us about the process of therapy related to treating anxiety and how we may want to change our perspective towards that. So you're just going to love this episode. It's so good. And so I'm just going to go straight to it because, you know, it lines up with what we're talking about. It's a different way of explaining it. You might even really resonate with the way that she explains it. So I'm just going to take you straight there. Okay? I will see you next week. Have a wonderful day. And it is a beautiful day to do hard things. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. I am so excited to talk with you. Number one, I'm a therapist geek, so I love talking to other therapists. And I've always had this idea. I don't know what you think about this, but I've always wanted to go to a different therapist of a different modality just to see what different modalities would say to me if I went to them with the same problem as like an experiment. So I love nothing more than getting other therapists' view on subjects. And so what I'm so excited about today is just to get your view and your approach to managing anxiety and see how you would handle it if you were in a session with a client. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And that sounds like a very, very fun game to play. I like it.
An expensive, but a fun game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, therapy becomes this thing that's like a luxury.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I know.
Yeah. So what is your approach to anxiety, or what's your view or perspective in terms of the treatment of anxiety?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. And you're right that it is actually really interesting to think about how different modalities and clinicians um, sort of examine that lens. Okay, so the way that I have over the years of being, I'm a classically trained analytic. That my training program and my doctoral program was analytic. Specifically, it was really kind of looking at Brenner. So that's sort of the lens through which I was learning, right? And then over the years and being in different settings, from psychiatric hospitals to university clinics to private practice and on, including prisons, I took in lots of different um, lenses that worked. So now, at this stage in my career, first of all, anxiety is an epidemic. It's everywhere. In America, it's 60 million Americans. The average age of onset is 11. And it's a full body experience. We feel it physically, we feel it emotionally, and we feel it cognitively. So it sort of spares no part of your whole system. And we can certainly get into that. But what I try to do when somebody comes in endorsing any symptom, and we're going to talk specifically about anxiety, is I really try to listen, certainly in the first session, and usually most of all of the second session, just to try to understand what their current experience with anxiety is, because it's such a wide, as you know, some people's expression of anxiety looks like this. And other people's is, in the emergency room. It's the panic attacks are the number one reason for admission to the emergency room. So to just understand where on the continuum are they. And also for me, a component of that is I try to understand if their view of what controlled anxiety would be is realistic. Because sometimes people think any anxiety is pathologic. They come in sort of thinking, I just want to get rid of it. And it's neurobiologically impossible. And it's unrealistic. It sets somebody up to feel as though no matter what kind of progress they've made, they're failing. So there's a big chunk of time where in the beginning, I'm just trying to assess, okay, where are they on that continuum of seeing it as pathologic versus non-pathologic? And then you get pretty soon you can get a handle on, like, okay, no, this person is really struggling with the most severe expressions, or we have to help this person heal their relationship to anxiety, which isn't, anxiety is in and of itself, it's morally and ethically neutral. It's just a feeling. And then it sends this cascading of information through lots of systems in your body, including your brain. And then we really start to tango with it. And we get to see, so what does somebody do when they feel this actual feeling? So that's sort of my general global approach.
Why do you think some people see it as pathological and some people don't?
Probably lots of different reasons, but I do think we're coming off the heels of this kind of decade or maybe two where suppression of symptoms was our primary mode of helping people. And I'm mid 40s, so when I was training in my master's as young as 23, God help anybody that I saw, and later on, as I matured. But when I was training, because I was in an analytic program, I was a little bit sort of buffered from that, because they were really old school analysts who believed in the individual journey, the N of one platform. But The mainstream was really in sort of suppression of symptoms. And we also simultaneously have this narrative going that like the best years of your life were 0 to 25. And so, and people kind of would come in and think like, well, I just caught this from my genes. And I feel as though it, at least in part, that's a slice of the pie that I think people inherit through the messages in society and in families and in all kinds of systems of organization. People get messages that anxiety is bad. It is difficult. It's not like love. It's not like lust. It's not like infatuation. It falls more on the spectrum of feelings like fear and, anxiety and those kinds of experiences we have as sapiens. But a lot of times there's repairing to do just with the relationship around anxiety. There's real distinctions to be made between healthy anxiety that's communicating with you and anxiety that's sort of come off the rails and is really destabilizing or dysregulating.
Right, right. What would be, in your opinion, an example of a healthy degree of anxiety or a human degree of anxiety? What does that look like in your mind?
Well, I'd imagine following that N of one, it sort of looks different for everybody because it's also, some people they're kind of wired for higher levels of adrenaline, dopamine, norepinephrine, these real speedy feeling, cortisol from the adrenals, these speedy feelings we get when anxiety is starting to happen. So it's probably highly unique. And part of that is the art of, in our sort of craft of where you start to realize what's this individual person's appetite for risk and fear and challenge, right? And once you understand that, you can really individualize that answer. But if I had to just generalize it for people listening, is that there's a way that you can begin to observe your interior experiences and really let it inform you. Even if the information is, wow, I'm really overwhelmed. Okay, noted. And then there's things you can do, right? There's lots of techniques and strategies. But if your anxiety, and I really use this phrase over and over, if your relationship to the anxiety is morally and ethically neutral. It's just a form of communication, just like language. So this is through the language of sensations and feelings. And so it's your relationship. And if that relationship really starts to slip into the place where you're ruminative, you're constantly negatively speculating. So the what ifs are always negative, catastrophic thinking. And then on the sort of more pernicious and insidious side, you can get paranoia, suspicion. Then you start to really get the relationship with and phobias and the expressions of anxiety that are always trying to tell us that the person is really suffering. So, that's my long-winded answer.
Right. And so I love this idea. I use the same term, which is a relationship, right, with your fear. Talk to me about your narrative around what that actually looks like or feels like, or how someone might get to that place of having a harmonious relationship.
Yeah. And I'll even sort of, if I'm going to be super nitpicky, like if you were like a patient sitting across from me, I'd even hone in on harmonious, because that's already now you're gearing your vessel to believe that this should feel good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not how it goes. At a certain point in our life, we let go of this type of thinking called magical thinking. And when we don't, we see these like they're relics of this less, or we would call it regressed style of thinking. And they often are unconscious. And because they're unconscious, they're assumptions. And so we don't even examine the word harmonious. We just sort of flip through it and then I answer it and you think, oh, there's a way that I could be harmonious all the time, right? So once we sort of get really square together that there's just going to be periods of time in life where you're really uncomfortable, and you can increase your emotional flexibility for that discomfort. That's always through exposure or time under tension, just like physical training is. And we can, through examining and spending time together in your relationship. See, anxiety always orbits in the world with control and fear. You'll always find them in some trifecta. And so we want to increase the tolerance for ambiguity, because then you can really change your relationship to control. Anxiety is like the tip that comes through on the water, right? But underneath it is this fuel source that keeps on feeding this physical experience of anxiety. And then usually when it goes to our head is when it sort of goes amok, right? Then we start to have thoughts like, I'm going crazy. I'm really screwed up. I'm the only one experiencing this. Those are all thoughts, all of which go unchecked, because anxiety is like the levees have been breached. There's no night watch anymore. But I will say this, going back to your original question, what's one of the things, the most valuable thing somebody can do to heal their relationship with anxiety is stillness. And it's the worst, it's the last thing you want to hear. Like, you want to gouge the eyes out of the person that tells you to be still in your anxious body. So it feels cruel, but it's so helpful. And even if it's like 2 minutes, remember the philosophy is time under tension, because we're trying to build psychological flexibility. That's a muscle. And muscles need to be worked to exhaustion to build. So if exhaustion is 2 minutes, then great, do it for 2 minutes. But if you never go to the exhaustion point, like literally where you think, I can't sit here for another moment, you'll sort of sub-train, you'll sub-train that muscle. So stillness. And then I don't have a horse in the race. And by the way, stillness is an interior stillness. You can do yoga. You can go to the golfing range like my husband does. You can do like walking meditations like Jack Kornfield really talks about, Tara Brach talks about it. But there's an interior stillness. And that is, you're doing so many things there. I mean, I don't want to sort of like geek out on your audience if they're not like caring about this part of it, but they may have already been like, turn the channel. I don't want to still. But in stillness, you are building the muscle of emotional flexibility. You're simultaneously, if you're working with somebody skilled like we are, you're simultaneously building what shrinks call an observing ego, the capacity to observe yourself without so much noise. You're just, oh, wow, I'm really overwhelmed, period. Not, I'm really overwhelmed. Oh my God, I haven't made any progress. Oh my God, it's not working. Whatever the next phrase that comes. So you're building that. You are also learning how to just be present in discomfort, which is really why I took harmonious out of the previous phrase, right? So that's the one thing I would say. And I don't have a horse in the race if people do it guided, unguided, none of that. Just start to build a relationship. And if you want to, we can talk about stacking, right? If we can stack approaches, we really get more return on our investment. So if you're already have a relationship with stillness, which by the way is hard enough, then I would stack a breath work. Essentially, with panic, the battle with, once you're past the 50-yard line on the anxiety train, everything from that 50-yard line on is won and lost with your breath. Right? That battle is won and lost with your breath. So if you can develop a relationship in that stillness with your breath, at first you can just observe it. You can work with apps on it. I would suggest that the breath be, that the emphasis be on natural breath and then long exhale breaths versus short. So short exhale will that will lead to upregulation, and long exhales will lead to downregulation. So that's something I think people should just start immediately or continue and add the breath work in.
And so for those, there's two things I want you to clarify. So for those who want to understand stillness, but not in the form of sitting still, you said it could be moving. What are you actually talking about for those who haven't yet experienced that?
So what I would suggest is then the person, and this is like just my own sort of practice of it. I would be barefoot and try to find grass or sand, and choose a path and pace it. Pace it back and forth.
And what is the goal in that? Is it for you, in your expression, would it be to just be with and observe?
Yes. Yep. Just be in your body, observe yourself. If you're really close to panic, take really deep breaths. Start to actually observe that, our breath it's part of our system, autonomic nervous system, and it's auto. So it's often unconscious to us. There's a lot of people who haven't spent time understanding their relationship to breath. And they're amazed to find out how much of a regulatory system it is. We see it in babies really clearly when they're really upset and they're hyperventilating. And, shh, shh, and we model to them, slow your breath down, and we hold them, right? And that's all this, these micro expressions that we show our children how to self-regulate. And the reason we have the instinct, and the shh is much longer, you're not trying to get at a feverish pitch. It's because we know that if the baby can catch its breath, the central nervous system can start to regulate. So same principle here. And if we really return to those simple things, like my experience has been that anxiety is an epidemic right now. And I understand it. Like I really, as a therapist, I always relate as a person first. I've had periods of time in my life where, I just felt really overwhelmed. And the thing is that it's also really amenable to change. And it's extremely responsive to sort of targeted efforts that usually don't have to involve, it usually doesn't need extrinsic, meaning medication or something like that. And that's really hopeful because, the truth is that it's harder to manage apathy. If we think about sort of panic on one end and apathy on the other end, right? And we can translate that to like anxiety or severe depression, the apathy that and the hopelessness that comes with that. It's harder. So anxiety is very, very, very amenable to dialogue.
It's funny you mentioned the baby, because anytime I think about having a relationship with anxiety, I always sort of explain to clients, like, if you wanted to get to know a child, you would spend time with it, right? You wouldn't be in the other room cooking while the child is playing. You don't get to know them that way. But it's the same with anxiety. You have to spend time with it, in that stillness. I think is exactly that same point.
Yeah, you really do. You have to get to know it. And by getting to know it, you get to know yourself deeply. You are going to unpack traumas, and you're going to unpack injuries, and you're going to face a lot of psychological and emotional intersections that allow you to deeply know yourself. And that is curative.
Right. I love it so much. I think it's great that we're slowing down to really break that down. The other thing I wanted for you to clarify is, for those who aren't in therapy or don't have this terminology, what do you mean by flexibility?
Oh, psychological flexibility? Yeah, great question. So when we think about anxiety, one of the things that I always want my patients to observe is that anxiety feels, we talked about orbiting around control, talked about how it orbits around fear. And with that, it has a rigidity. You know what I mean? It's got a quality to it that is rigid.
Black and
And
white.
when something is rigid, it requires constant tending in order not to snap. So the same principle. So when we think about psychological flexibility, what we're really talking about is developing the capacity to be present in your experience as it is. You're not trying to shape shift it. So that you're not being told to think positively, and you're not being told to have gratitude, even though both of those practices actually enhance our experience of being human. You don't necessarily have to have compassion. You just have to experience who you are in this moment. And when you're able to do that, and I have sort of a ratio I like people to think about, because anxiety often pairs with a type of personality that tends toward perfectionism and high achieving. And so it falls victim to a type of thinking that is so unrealistic.
Black and white, right?
Yeah, it's black and white. It's rigid. It is part of the rigid system that we're talking about. And so the psychological flexibility gives your vessel that suppleness back, and that ability to bob and weave, change direction, see multiple points of view, creatively problem solve. So it's huge. It's a huge adult developmental possibility.
Right.
Children go through very natural stages where you can developmentally really see them working through elements of anxiety and fear, and you can sort of see how they're trying to manage it. I got an almost 11-year-old, and he's like consumed with justice, and like sometimes when that's like about bedtime, it's down to the last 4 seconds of, because that's what's fair. These are normal developmental stages, right? But by the time you're an adult, you're supposed to sort of have fluidity around these things. But, most of us don't. We have pockets of our psychology, present company included. We just have pockets of our psychology that, are arrested, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
Arrested development is a real thing. Nobody is spared.
Right, right. And in your mind, okay, so everyone I'm sure listening is sort of nodding their head and smiling, and yeah, that's me. And sometimes I think you're right, is it not in all the areas? It might be just in one area, right?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Oh, yes. It can be completely compartmentalized, completely compartmentalized. And here's the other thing, the reason why the suppression model doesn't actually work, that we talked about in the opening segment, is because usually your kryptonite is the opposite side of your greatest strength. So the pocket of your life where it's not working for you, you don't just want to suppress it, because you lose the flip side of the coin where it's probably one of your best assets. And so you want it, that's part of the psychological flexibility. You want to learn how to have influence and participation in which side of the coin is face up.
Right. And you talk about that in one of your blog posts. I think it was your article, "The remedy is the remedy is in the wrestle." Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'll link to it in the show notes too.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So that blog really kind of looks at this notion that, like I was saying at the beginning of the hour, actually, that a lot of times I learned over time, and that's just stuff that comes from like logging hours in the chair, as a therapist. Like, they can't teach this to you in school, right? So, but I learned over time to be really observant of how people orbited around struggle. And you can fill in the blank. Like, somebody might think like, I got my whole anxiety game fairly dialed in, like I can use anxiety as a fuel source. I'm not super depleted. And by depleted, we can even sort of look at a whole systems approach to it later in conversation if you want. But everybody's got something. Nobody is spared. So when I started observing that, like, it's interesting that a lot of people, they don't realize they're saying this, but they're basically saying, I don't ever want to feel bad. And that sort of sent me searching, like as a therapist. This is probably maybe now in earnest, like a decade ago, but the long arc of it took me a long time to figure out what I was even trying to figure out. But like, it sent me sort of searching for this type of lens that would help understand why suffering seemed both universal, everybody seemed to have it, and somehow healthy. That, in fact, the denial of any phase of suffering, this whole suppression model, was resulting in all these other symptom patterns showing up that I felt like, oh, wait, this isn't what's happening here. And so it really sent me sort of looking, and I started getting interested in like positive psychology. And then I sort of found my way through a couple of funny rabbit holes toward this guy that I really enjoy his work. His name's Stephen Kotler. He's written a bunch of really great books that aren't about anxiety per se. They're actually about optimal performance and flow, and really understanding the neurobiology of how our brain operates. And that was really an aha thing for me. Like, then I was like, oh, this makes sense. So it turns out that struggle is the first of 4 cycles that the brain goes through in an effort to feel well. If we translate flow into the sort of wider discussion of like feeling, empowered, that you have control over the things you're sort of trying to strive for, that you feel like you can concentrate when you need to concentrate. There's lots of ways we can break down this word to sort of be applicable to everyday activities. And when I started to reframe it like that for a lot of my patients, and that sort of fed into understanding that I actually needed to help people become more aware of just their relationship to suffering. And was it even realistic? Is suffering always some sort of detour away from being good or happy or whatever what these other things are? Or is it part of the process? And my sense is that in the vast majority of the cases, not always. It is part of the process. It's really part of what our brain and our body does to kind of prime our vessel.
Right. I love it so much. So tell me a little bit more about optimum performance and your work with that.
So that's something that over the years I've increasingly, so I would say about 5 years ago, I made a really conscious decision that I made two conscious decisions, and they were both equally important to finding my way to optimal performance or flow or positive psychology. One was that for the last, say, 10 or 12 years prior to that time, my practice was 75% women and 25% men. And I just sort of arbitrarily one day, maybe because I felt like I needed to kind of like spice up my private practice, decided that over the course of that year, I was going to flip that ratio, that I wanted to work 75% with men and 25% with women. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to, it was also like around the Me Too time. And I just sort of felt like, wow, like something's happening right now in history. And I want to deeply understand this other 50% of the population that's sort of, oftentimes rightly so, being raked through the coals right now. I just want to sit with men and deeply know them and see what that feels like. So that was critical because they taught me this language that they speak, which, by the way, I had 3 brothers, a dad, a husband, a kid of my own, a son. I was completely oblivious until they started coming to my office. That's why you don't do therapy with people you love and know in your life, right? Because you can't actually see it in the same way. So I really have the men that came to my practice and showed up to thank, because they were talking about this language. They weren't talking about like, I want to feel joy and I want to feel contentment. And they were like, I want to perform better. I want to, achieve blah, blah, blah. And I started to have to learn this language. So that was sort of one drive, right? Then I decided simultaneously, and not necessarily consciously connected, I decided that I wanted to turn my practice almost from a philosophical standpoint. I almost wanted to stop examining pathology and looking for it at all. And I really wanted to turn my gaze toward wellness, toward the study of how people thrive and what does that process look like and how do we engage in that experience as humans. And those two things sent me clearly in this direction. That's when I found the guy that I referenced earlier. Anybody out there who is looking to really deeply understand how you can channel anxiety, fear, risk, all those feelings into performance, this is your guy named Stephen Kotler. He's just great. So that's really how I landed there. I just sort of landed, I don't know, it just all sort of like fell into my focus once I made those two shifts. Wanted to work with men, and I wanted to almost try the method of, if I stopped looking at pathology, could we extinguish that discussion? People wouldn't keep coming in looking to find out what is wrong with me. They would come in looking to understand who they are. Right.
And I think that that's really important in the treatment of anxiety disorders is, the reason I go back on the word disorder is to bring it in and to take away the disorder name and go back to that sort of relationship. Like at the end of the day, all the disorders are pretty much the same, except for some slight differences because it's all related to a relationship that they have with fear.
Yeah, and anxiety in particular is always about It's about self-regulation. If we're really going to use an emotionally neutral word, it's about self-regulation. And, I try to approach with my patients, I always say there's really sort of 5 things you can do right now to start observing your relationship with these feelings. That's nutrition, hydration, sleep, recovery, and movement. So in those 5 things, you can have tons of subcategories. But if you really want to create a space where you can influence change, those 5 domains will usually take care of the vast majority of, quote, disorders.
Right. I've really noticed that myself when it comes to me trying to get more sleep. It changed the game for me.
Yeah, for everybody.
I really agree. Right. This is so cool. I have loved chatting with you about all of this. Can you tell us where people can find you and more of the blogs and the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. I know this has been great. So people can check out my website, which you'll put in the show notes, but it's drdrsarkis.com. I have my blog on there. Hopefully in the coming weeks, I'll have some exciting stuff that I'm going to collaborate with Stephen Kotler and the stuff that he's doing. So people, if they're interested in that, can really stay tuned. There'll be lots of opportunities there. And I have like a newsletter and social media and all that. I've got all the regular stuff that everybody's hawking these days. So anybody that wants to join or sign up, you're appreciated more than you know.
That's fantastic. It's fun. It's fun to hear your approach. I think it's really, I think people in the listeners will find it so in line with what we're doing, but with a different approach. And I just love to hear that. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on. This was awesome. And I know I like waterboarded you with emails, and you were so delicate and kind. And so this has been such a great opportunity, and I love what you're putting out there. So, and you're in Los Angeles, right? In Santa Monica?
I'm in Calabasas.
Okay. So I come to California like probably 2 or 3 times a year, and I'm quickly collecting a whole group of people that we should like have, because you're all doing interesting podcasts, all sort of from different angles about the same stuff. So maybe when I come, I'll try to like get a lunch.
Oh, I'd love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. Fabulous.
We can meet up.
Well, thank you. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.